Hi, Karina. Welcome to the Integrative Health Coach Success Podcast.
Hi, Julia. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, our pleasure. I'm excited for us to have a conversation about kind of what's going on in your world as far as health and wellness is concerned. I think it's something that's becoming much popular these days, and I think a lot of our community members will benefit from it. So I'm looking forward to our topic here. What I would love for you to do to start is, can you share with our listeners a little bit about what you're currently doing in the health and wellness space with IHP and so on and so forth?
Yes, of course. Again, thanks so much for having me. Currently, I work with nurses to just help them, give them information, empower them if they are looking for anything else outside the conventional nursing world. So outside of the bedside, conventional, working in the hospital. If they're looking for anything that's more functional, integrative, root cause medicine, I try to provide resources so that they are able to see what options are out there. And currently, I am enrolled in IHP. I found that a lot of the people who I got inspiration from, a lot of them were IHPs. And so when I started diving into this IHP world, I started following just different people like Emily Morrow, and it led me down just a whole new world. And so I love to share that with nurses who are looking for something different.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of people have said that on this podcast before, where they, were following people on Instagram and they realized, oh my gosh, like they know what I want to know. And, actually somebody that I interviewed just on Monday said what they all had in common was they were all IHPs. And so, yeah, I think it's one of those things where the information, it's more than just like being a health coach, right? It's like so much more in depth than that, which most people don't tend to realize. So you're still practicing as a nurse. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing kind of in that space.
Yes. So, of course, once you become a registered nurse, you'll always be a nurse. I think there's that misconception that people think like, oh, once you're no longer working in the hospital, you're no longer a nurse. But that's, farther from the truth. It couldn't be further from the truth. We're still nurses. We had that training, and a lot of us started out at the hospital. And thankfully, I was able to meet Kelsey Rowell from Whole Life Nurse. She loves to encourage nurses to find other ways to just have fulfillment in their career, right? If you don't want to be working full time at the hospital, how about taking like a part time and then choosing a PRN that that you really like? For example, IV therapy. There's nurses out there that will go to IV bars and do IV therapy, and that's how they get started in the functional integrative world. But now I'm currently at a functional medicine clinic that just opened up. It's crazy how it all happened. I had previous functional medicine experience at a clinic, and unfortunately I had to end up leaving that place. And so I was kind of at a period in time where I was working from home remotely. And like I said, I was working remotely, and I live in a really small town. And so for that clinic to open up in my own hometown, it was amazing. It was an amazing opportunity. I couldn't believe it was happening. And when I walked by and it said functional medicine, I was, I just couldn't believe it. And I reached out to them. And I think that's another thing that nurses don't realize is that, just put yourself out there. It's scary, but if we don't put ourselves out there, then, how can we expect to make a change? And so I just reached out to them and said, hey, I'm Karina, I am interested. If you're ever looking for a nurse, I live just around the corner. And sure enough, a few weeks later, they reached out, and I ended up getting hired. And so, of course, right now it's very part-time, but it was a perfect opportunity for me to, leave a place that I didn't really necessarily find myself to be fulfilled in what I wanted. And so I transitioned over to the clinic, and I also started enrolled in IHP. There's so many nurses I feel like just don't know where to start, but just starting somewhere is a great first step.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think so many people tend to think like, again, it has to be all or nothing, right? You're either like a nurse in a hospital or you're like a coach in a functional clinic. But I think what a lot of these functional medicine, clinics or holistic, type of places are realizing is when they have somebody who's medically trained on their staff, I actually think that it helps bridge the gap of people who maybe are a little bit kind of like, well, what do you mean? Like nobody knows anything about like real quote unquote medicine, or right? It can kind of make it seem like they are more holistic, right? Because there's so much about allopathic medicine that's important that a nursing training gives you information that you have that would be helpful in a functional clinic setting, right? Like that, right? And for, a lot of people, they might think like, oh, what is this functional clinic going to, want to hire a nurse for? But I think it's again speaks to the well-roundedness of what people really need for care. We need it all. It all has a place. And when you are a nurse with root cause focus, I mean, it's the best of both worlds because you have a little bit of the allopathic knowledge, and then also the functional root cause knowledge. So then it's kind of the perfect, mix of both.
Yeah, it truly is the best of both worlds. The doctor who founded this clinic came from a conventional world at a big hospital here in our state. And so he just really realized that there was that need. People wanted other alternatives because they weren't getting better. And sometimes a lot of people that come to root cause medicine is because they have exhausted all their options. They've gone to the conventional route. They've been on medication and therapies and nothing has worked for them. And sometimes they find something else that is more natural, that doesn't come with as many side effects, and they get better. And so it's just bridging the gap on both of those worlds. And like I mentioned, I was, I started as a nurse on the floor in a progressive cardiac care. And I started just realizing there's a pattern here, metabolic disease. And so it just really led me to finding, IHP or Dr. Josh Axe. And there's so many other people in this field like Dr. Hyman who gives us so many resources, and it just opens up your eyes to a whole different world.
Yes. Yeah. Which I would actually love to dive into that next, because I think it's such an important kind of way of thinking about things, right? And I'm curious so say you're on a floor with, let's just call it like arbitrary numbers, like 8 other nurses, right? How often are you having these conversations with other nurses or doctors or how much are other people seeing like, all of these patterns are happening. All of these patients have X, Y, and Z. All of them are overweight, or all of them have a diet high in this. Or is it a conversation that's happening within the hospital? Or was it kind of just you, being, independently observant and thinking like there's got to be more to this stuff? I'm curious what the environment's like these days.
Yes, it was definitely more of just me opening my eyes to different things, because I felt like everybody that, went to med school or went to nursing school, we're all just trained to think on alike, right? I mean, you learn through books and you all learn the same foundational things. And we learn about pharmaceuticals, and we hear, I mean, most of the doctors aren't trained in nutrition or supplements and things like that. And so it's a completely different world. And I remember working during the pandemic, and I was still working in the conventional side of things. And I started, doing a little bit of research like everybody else was, what therapies are out there that are helping these patients. And I sent some more natural things over to one of the cardiologists that I was working with at the heart failure clinic. And, they had no clue. And, if these things are working, why aren't we implementing them, in the hospitals too? And so it just leads you down a whole different path. And so most people, when you bring up these alternatives, I transitioned out of the heart failure clinic into a functional medicine clinic where we did IV therapy for those who had symptoms. And so we did vitamin C, we did IV ozone, we did a lot of different therapies and supplements, and people got better. And so people, I feel like they don't realize what this world can offer. And it really does take you to, as like myself, just taking myself out of that world and pursuing and connecting with people who really see the potential and who really have seen improvements for their people and their patients and their clients.
Yes. Yeah. I think, like you said, it almost isn't necessarily the way that the way that they see it, in a sense of what's going on in that space in the moment, but how we're educated, right? IHPs are educated to kind of address and look at, root cause. Somebody in the allopathic setting is more educated to just deal with symptoms and, using things like medication and whatnot. And so it's really just a function of education. The same thing, dietitians are educated in a very specific and maybe different way than a nutritionist in a functional type of courses, or, like Emily Morrow's blood chemistry course. What you learn in her class is way different than what, another, training might tell you about blood. So it's all about the way that we're educated, that we're kind of trained to see things. But it's so inspiring, in my opinion, that there's people like yourself who are kind of taking it and realizing, well, so maybe there's more. And it doesn't have to be this all or nothing, or, my education didn't mean anything if I kind of go this way, right? We can take what's good from everything and make this whole picture that's beneficial to the client, right? Because there's tons of if we believe in individual care, like which we do, there's so many things that could come into play with what a person needs.
Exactly. And I think that's so important that you bring that up is, the education piece. I feel like a lot of us that are in the conventional world, we really are encouraged, especially as nurses, like, oh, the goal is to become an NP or to, get to the top and more letters behind your name. And that doesn't necessarily equate, happiness like in your life or within the conventional allopathic world. For example, I applied to NP school, and it was a difficult decision to decline going through the program, because I know that investing all that time and the money and the years, they're not going to be teaching me the root cause. And when I was at the functional medicine clinic, I learned about root causes. So, parasites, heavy metals, and mold toxicity, and all those things that aren't really seen or touched on at all in the conventional world. I never saw or heard of those things being taught or addressed in the hospital setting until I got to that clinic, and people were getting better, and we weren't really prescribing any pharmaceuticals. We were treating with supplements and lifestyle changes. And I feel like that's where it comes in. There's a lot of, certifications out there, and everybody's journey is completely different. We all have different goals professionally, within our family, within our lives, and where we see ourselves. And so I think it's important to have those options out there and know that they are and that they exist. And so that's kind of where I am now. It's just, I chose to go the IHP route because a lot of the people that are doing the things that I see myself doing, potentially, having my own health coaching services that I can do online remotely, that's a great option. But when you become an NP, you're only licensed in your state. You're limited to only working with clients in your state. But once you have, an IHP certification, you're a health coach and you can function in that realm. I know that there's this quote out there that, the doctor of the future will not be prescribing pharmaceuticals, right? That's the goal. That's the ultimate goal. People don't want to be on medications. And so I think that's important to know as well, that, we do have options and it doesn't have to be limited. And, more letters behind our name doesn't always equate happiness.
Yes, I think that's such a good point. And I had interviewed somebody that the episode has already aired several weeks back, and same thing. She was thinking about potentially doing like functional medicine to become a naturopath. And when she looked at the amount of like schooling that it would entail and how her license would limit her, an NP, a nurse practitioner, or, even a doctor of naturopathy, right? Like when you hear those, it sounds so much more prestigious, right? Than an integrative health practitioner. But I love what you said, that, those letters don't necessarily mean that you're either one, learning what you're passionate about and what's going to help you serve clients the best, but also, are you learning what truly makes you tick and what you believe in? And how is that going to, serve in your happiness? And even, I would argue, if you're happy and passionate, any business that you launch or any employee that you are, you're just much better at what you're doing because there's passion and belief behind it. I mean, that's probably ultimately why you moved out of the hospital realm, because you were kind of like, oh, maybe it didn't feel aligned, right? Like you didn't feel like you were aligning with what you were doing. And as human beings, we're meant to acknowledge that.
Yeah. And that's exactly where I'm at today. I was working remotely from home, and that's like, a lot of people think like, oh, that's the ultimate goal. And that's totally fine. But it wasn't in an area that I loved. And I realized, during that transition, during that year that I worked from home, I realized that, my passion is functional medicine and root cause medicine, and just there's so much information that people need to learn about. I myself try to implement some of those things like parasite cleansing. People think that, oh, we live in America, we don't have parasites here. That's couldn't be further from the truth. There are so many people that, they're like, you have parasites, and they're very surprised. Like, I tell their answer, like, if you have a pulse, you probably have parasites. It just all depends on your immune system. And just teaching people about lifestyle and just removing toxins from your life. It can feel overwhelming, but I think if you just take the time to learn, and, people think that this field is saturated, and that, oh, there's so many people that are already doing it, but everybody has a niche. And so just like in nursing, when you go to nursing, you can do, emergency, you can do inpatient, you can do ICU, you can do outpatient. There's so many different areas that you can choose as a nurse. And it's the same thing goes for health coaching. You can choose to work with, kids. You can choose to work with adults. You can choose to work with, focus on diabetic patients, or just parasite cleansing, or, whatever. A lot of people, like I said, come to this world because they themselves have found, their healing, or they have improved their health by implementing some of these things. And so whatever that may be for that person is something that, they could niche down to and find a group of people who they can help. They will resonate with the way that you talk, or the way your lifestyle. And so there's so much opportunity out there.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think with, so many careers, right? There's always an area of specialty. And those tend to be, again, more passion driven, or, I know so many clients who they got into this because their kids were sick, and then they end up helping their kids. And so then their focus in their practice is children, or, they had parasites and that was the answer. So that's what they focus on, right? There's so many times where what we experience ultimately kind of leads to what we want to spread as far as a message is to other people. So yeah, I don't think it's saturated either. There's, I think, certainly a lot of people who do, but I think because we tend to be practitioners that are alike, we tend to kind of all be connected, whether it be social media, or, it looks like everybody that is on your feed is talking about it, right? But that doesn't mean that people who are on other feeds are hearing it, or that it's a common message at all. So what I would love to ask you next is, as far as kind of your contacts or close relationships, did you find that there was any, from moving, or even, in your own personal life, maybe people who weren't in the hospital setting, or just other people that love you in your life, was there any kind of pushback? Was it hard to go from more of that allopathic, nursing space to more of a functional? Yeah. What, how was your experience at that?
I think once I started learning so much through that functional clinic, I just loved it. And I started sharing it with, my family, and they were all a little bit in like shock, and like also wanted to learn more. And I think you kind of come across those two people. Some people are like, wow, tell me more. And some people are like, that's just weird. I don't know. I think that's just, weird medicine. I don't think it's doing anything for me. But I think until they try it and they know that, these certain symptoms could potentially be associated with, parasitic infection, or once they get to learn, I think that they become a little bit more open. And I think just implementing them ourselves. So like doing a parasite cleanse and you're telling them about what you're seeing and the things that you're experiencing. And they're like, wow, like I had no clue. And they just become a little bit more open and more aware, like, oh, if I'm dealing with this and I do this, like I could potentially, not have to deal with this. Wow. Like I want to try that. And I think it just takes, putting yourself out there. And I learned a lot from, like I mentioned, whole life nurse, Kelsey Rouse. She is just really, she had a hard time through nursing school, and she just, she loved her patients, and she realized that, she felt like she was just another nurse on the floor and just being at the mercy of management. And so she just learned to do what was right for her and to fight for the things that she enjoyed and that she wanted, that work-life balance. And that's what she teaches nurses now. And so I think that's a great example of just like following what you're passionate about and, not apologizing for it, because it's what you believe and it's like your truth. And that's what you want to teach about and to learn about. And I think that's what's most important. It's just, I think, and people can tell when you're passionate about something.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And, it's ultimately your happiness and your life and being able to kind of lead by a way of authenticity, I think is incredibly important. So a little bit about, I'm curious what your role is in the clinic, as far as, what you typically do there, how you would, if, we have other nurses that are listening and they're like, oh, gee, I wonder what that looks like if I were to kind of reach out to a clinic in my area. I wonder like what she's doing, how it integrates and all of that. Could you give us a little bit of a look into kind of what you're doing?
Yeah, of course. So I feel like I've gained so much knowledge just from, doing IHP and then just following the people that I have followed over the years. And I bring a lot of that knowledge into the clinic. And sometimes the doctors will, ask like, what do you think I should do for this? Or this patient has this and I recommended this. And sometimes I'll be like, oh, did you suggest this? And so they're like, oh yeah, thank you for reminding me of that. And so they come from a different world, and so they are still a little bit new to learning about the functional things, but they're very open to it because they have seen over the past couple of years that, there is this need for people want alternatives and they want to know that there is something out there that will make them feel better. But as a nurse there, I, do intake. I will take vital signs. And then right now like I mentioned, we are new, but we are opening an IV therapy. So I'll be, starting IVs and then we'll make recommendations based on whatever the patients may be feeling or needing support with, whether that be like migraines or just, feeling like they're having a cold coming. We'll have a special vitamin cocktail for them to implement that and just boost their immune system. So just integrating some supplements, but also, if there's something, some acute need that they need pharmaceuticals with, of course, we have those doctors who will prescribe those things. It's just taking a little bit of everything that they've learned over the years and bridging it with functional medicine. So providing options for supplements and, like I mentioned, IV therapy. And so I think just learning so much from IHP and the people that I have followed, just bringing that information to them. We work very well collaboratively.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's, again, when there's a lot of people in one room who kind of believe in the same thing, regardless of, who knows more, it's just always like a conversation, right? And there's always more to learn. And I think that when you have that mindset, it doesn't matter, what your title is, if you're all just kind of learning more from each other, right? Like they might be teaching you something that you didn't know and vice versa. Being in those settings of just collaborative learning is really where patients, in my opinion, get the best care. Clients, patients, whatever you want to call them, they're getting the best care.
And I think about, I was going to say, I think about the people and the patients that are coming in. They're so used to the conventional model where you go in, you wait 30 minutes in the waiting room or more sometimes. Mm-hmm. And you go in and you talk to your provider for like maybe 15 to 20 minutes. and you leave not knowing what just happened. And so I think that's a big difference in functional clinics, is that the provider really takes the time to know why you're really here and what you really hope to get out of, working with your provider in a functional setting. Is most of the appointments are at least, 45 to an hour. So I think that's a big difference that people don't realize, that when you go into functional clinic, you're going to be spending a lot of time there because your provider really wants to get to the root cause of your issues. And they're going to be asking you questions that are different than what your medical doctor in the conventional setting would be asking you.
Yes. Yeah. I love that you bring that up, because even just the time is a major difference, but the questions that are being asked are oftentimes night and day. I've never had a conventional doctor ask me how my sleep is. I mean, they ask, like, I always chuckle at, like, do you wear your seatbelt? I'm like, yes, I wear my seatbelt, but like, what, like, nobody asks, if you're drinking enough water. Nobody asks if you're, getting sunlight, what your mood is like, if you're sleeping well, right? Like, those are all things that indicate how much wellness is kind of in the forefront of your mind, or what you're able to kind of fit in as far as self-care is concerned. And I think that the questions are the biggest differentiating factor that are asked. And like you said, the time, because if you don't have enough time, how are you going to hear someone's story? Right. And I think a lot of IHPs who've come into the health and wellness space that we're currently in, the thing that oftentimes gives them the most drive to do that is because they were seen in the same kind of a setting where they finally found answers and felt heard. It's really hard to feel like your practitioner is hearing you when it's 10 or 15 minutes of, intake or whatnot, because you just don't have time to share your story and how you feel. And oftentimes, if you don't look sick, a lot of that conventional, realm can kind of dismiss things. And they just dismiss it as, well, your labs look good. And that's so confusing and can kind of be something that gets people down when they don't feel so well.
Exactly. And I think it's so important to know that, there are doctors trained with functional backgrounds that will ask you so many questions that you won't be asked. And so people are so surprised. They leave so, like, they're so happy that somebody was able to hear them out, and to know that, there is hope, and that they will feel better, and that they will get better. So I think that's one of the biggest differences going from the conventional world to that functional world. And just the same, I tell nurses and I share with them that, there's the different certifications out there, and that people don't know that you don't necessarily, there are options out there for us. So, like in the guide that I created for, nurses in functional medicine, the people that want to know what options there are, I created that for them, because I was asked frequently, what can I do? Where do I start? And so a lot of people wanted to know if there's any certifications I should go to. And of course, everybody's different, but I do discuss, and I tell them, like, here's the NP route, here's, IHP or whatever other certification. Even if you go NP route, now you'll have to become IFM certified, and that can take 2 years, and that can be an extra like $15,000. Like, are you willing to spend, all of that time and all of that money? And there's pros and cons to everything, but I guess just going back to, it all depends on like what your goals are. So I like to share that with nurses, is that there are options out there. You can order labs, I know it's not within like the health coaching scope of practice, but, as nurses, we are trained to look at labs in the hospital setting, look at them in a functional perspective. That's why Emily Mara created her course. And I share that with people, there is a way to look at these labs completely differently than what we're used to looking at.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. And it just goes back to education and having the mental flexibility to, see that there's other options. Then there's always ways that this might benefit, the patient versus this, and having the ability to kind of have a wide lens is the way that we serve, people the best. And I have another friend she's an IHP, but she's also a nurse. And I've, referred someone to her who was more medically complicated, and her lens is much wider in that sense, right? Than mine is. And sometimes, she would have a really, deep root cause case that she would, toss my way. It's one of those things where when we're in this community, we're able to kind of be able to know where the expertise, right, is deep in one area.
Exactly. Yeah, we're just able to, and that's what I love about this community. Once you really get to like dive deep in and start following people, and you're like, okay, what all do they have in common? Like, where is their education? And a lot of them, like I said, had IHP. That's why I chose to enroll with IHP. It's just because a lot of the people that were doing the things that I wanted to do had that education. And what I love about it is just that everybody is supportive of one another. Everybody is willing to share their resources and just point you in the right direction. And I think that's really important for when you come from a completely different world into a whole new one. You want to be able to be supported and know that there are resources out there for you.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. On that topic, if people are listening and they did want to connect more and kind of, talk resources and whatnot, where can people connect with you? You had mentioned kind of like this nursing guide to, courses. Tell us a little bit about where you show up in the social media world or websites.
Yeah, of course. So I am active on Instagram, and it's just Karina Barker. With 2 R's at the end, _ that's where I'm at. And I did create a guide just for those nurses that, just are wanting to know what options are out there. And in that guide, I do have a page with resources of podcasts to listen to, books to look into, to learn more about, this functional medicine world. I really admire this. And, you can go that NP route and just continue to learn, and it depends on your goals, like I mentioned. But Taylor Dukes, I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but she's a nurse practitioner, and she has bridged the gap between both worlds. And so that's somebody that you can look into. There's just so many people out there. Wellness Plus by Dr. Jess. She has so much information on there. I have some of those resources on there for those nurses that, are interested potentially in health coaching. I give them a little starting point on, what portal you could potentially use for clients, how to protect yourself by using Destination Legal and legal templates if you wanted to do that. And so I have just some of those resources in that guide. And I do share a lot of, a lot of things on Instagram too, that people can look into the highlights. And I talk about the different certifications and the different options that are out there.
That's great. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Integrative Health Coach Success Podcast. This is incredibly informational, and I think a lot of our listeners probably resonated with your path to where you are now. So I appreciate you being here and sharing your story.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to speak to IHP and everything that nurses can do in this functional medicine world.
Great. Thank you so much, Karina. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.